Yeah, we've spent a good part of our time talking about um, the preparation for relationships, that I before we, that you need to really work on yourself. You need to have a better sense of self, a more differentiated self before you can begin to enter into relationship. We're going to now shift and move our focus into relationships, into improving relationships. And in this section, we're going to look at some of the work of John Gottman, and some of the advice that he has for relationships. We're going to look at several factors that affect relationship, distance and direction. We're going to look at active listening, um, and it's really about listening and understanding and doing that actively and intentionally that really has a significant impact on relationship. We're going to look at something that's in the popular literature, love languages that may be familiar, and then we're going to finish up this section looking at dialogue, the connecting of responses between people. But let's start with John Gottman. John Gottman, just to give you just a tiny bit of background, he's a researcher, and he's researched marital relationships and marriages, and he has a lab out on the West Coast, and he's been doing this for a number of years. So he's not a clinician or a therapist, but the information that he's generated from his laboratory and looking at interactions, live interactions, where he's had people wired up, monitoring their physiology, their heart rate, and so forth. And he's taking down transcripts of dialogue between people, that he's come up with a lot of things that make a difference in relationships. And so one of the things John Gottman says, and he's reported, is that in relationships that succeed, there's at least a 5-to-1 ratio of positives to negative. Now, I don't expect you to pull out a calculator or to sit around and to try to keep count of or keep score of positives to negatives. But one of the things that you can do is that if you notice that there's trouble in a relationship that you have, it's likely that the ratio of positives to negatives has swung towards the more negative side, and that you're going to need to increase the positives. Now, what are positives? Positives have to do with showing interest in the other, asking questions, being a good listener or a better listener, and we'll talk about those things a little bit more, being affectionate and supportive, learning how to be at a proper distance, to be able to move towards rather than away, being able to capitalize and use some of the love languages. So those are some of the positives. The negatives have to do with being hostile, defensive, angry, mean-spirited, and some of those conflictual things that come up in a relationship. Now, a couple could have a hot or a cold relationship, and by hot relationship means that there's more negativity. If there's more negativity in the relationship, that 5-to-1 ratio still needs to be there. So there's a lot of making up. There's a lot more positives that are going to help balance out those negatives. Now, like me, I probably have a cooler relationship in that I don't really like lots of conflict and lots of fights. And so there doesn't need to be as many positives in the relationship to balance those. Gottman says that in a relationship that's going well, there's oftentimes as many as 20 positives to 1. So not that you need to memorize 5-to-1, but I think that there's a ratio of positives to negative that are in a relationship, and that even though you don't know it, that there is scoring that's taking place, and that there needs to be many more positives in the relationship for the negatives. And so if you're struggling, if you're having trouble with someone, you need to be intentional about increasing the positives in the relationship. Gottman also shared with us and talked to us about predictors of relationship trouble. And to look at the relationship trouble, he looks at when things move from complaints or complaining to what are called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And in a number of his books he writes about these, is that when you find criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling in a relationship. Those are predictors of relationship trouble. And especially when you get to contempt and stonewalling, that Gottman would predict that that relationship is not likely going to be able to last and be able to weather that. So let's look at some of these. Now again, I'm not sharing these in order for you to focus on them, but for you to be aware, because remember earlier I talked about the presence as opposed to the absence. And so if you're noticing these things, I don't want you necessarily to focus on them, but understand, let those be red lights, let those be danger signs that something needs to change. You need to get back on a positive track in your relationship. So complaining. Complaining is not going to destroy a relationship. Complaining oftentimes is essential, that we need feedback. We need to know how it is that we get on each other's nerves. We need to know what it is that I do, what it is that you do, that don't fit together very well. That makes it more difficult for us to get along. And so a complaint is letting us know that something's not okay. It's an expression of discontent, that someone is not happy or satisfied. We need to be able to hear that. I need to be big enough in order to not be devastated to hear that, to know that I'm not perfect. Again, going back to those cognitive distortions, all or nothing. Just because I make a mistake doesn't mean that I'm a crummy person in a relationship. It just means that I made a mistake, and so I need feedback so I can take corrective action, so that I can do things differently. And so that feedback may be in the form of a complaint. It's when things go beyond the complaint that things start to become much more conflictual in your relationship. Gottman talks about criticism. Criticism is going a step beyond the complaint. It's presenting a problem as though the other person has a defective personality. It's a complaint plus what's wrong with you. It's attacking the other person's personality or character. So rather than focusing on the behavior that's difficult, it's focusing on some personality or character element of that other person. And it's really hard to change a personality element. And so you have to keep in mind that the problem is the problem and the person's not the problem. When the person becomes the problem, what then is the answer? What then is the solution? When the person's the problem, the answer is to get rid of the person or to change the person. When the problem is the problem, then you both can look at the problem and begin to decide how you want to do things differently. You can do something differently. You can both do something differently, because oftentimes there's an interaction. So when there's criticism, there's the implication of blame, that there's something wrong with you. And so what's the reaction to that? When you feel criticized, when you feel that something's wrong with you, and it's a personality thing, and it's not just feedback or a complaint, what's oftentimes our reaction to that? Oftentimes it's going to be defensiveness. We feel attacked. And so we're going to take action to ward off the attack. And as a way to protect ourselves, oftentimes we may deflect that. Or we may also come back with a counter problem or a counter complaint. We may come back at that person to show them what's wrong with them. And then where does that go? We end up in an escalation of the conflict, where you end up with a counterattack. And so you end up denying responsibility. You end up making excuses. You end up taking a yes, but, and the but is always an excuse why you did what you did. That gives you an excuse for that, rather than taking responsibility and listening to the feedback. So you can see that when someone goes from a complaint to criticism, it makes it much more difficult not to be defensive. Our tendency is going to be defensive because we're going to feel personally attacked. And so if someone is making a complaint that then adds the element of you dummy to it, and you feel criticized, then it's going to be really important to avoid being defensive, and to let the other person know that what was shared really hurt, and that it sounded really critical and really critical of you, and that it's going to be really difficult to change your behavior and to work on the problem if the problem is you. Now, another step beyond that, beyond the criticism, is when there's an escalation of the criticism. And the escalation of the criticism is where there's this implication that the other person is somehow superior or more competent, that they're better or more responsible. So you see this hierarchy, as you can see in the little picture there, that the contempt is, it's more of an insult. It's more of a name calling. It's a really holding you, the other person, in a negative light. And oftentimes there's body language and facial expression that goes with that. The typical eye roll of contempt, when you roll your eyes, is kind of like saying, you know, you're a big dummy, and that how can you be so dumb? And then it puts that other person down. It's sort of a putting them down. It's a put down. It's an insult. It's like name calling. And when you're feeling contempt towards another person, you're oftentimes forgetting the positives about that person. So you can understand that when you start to find contempt in a relationship, it's going to be very difficult to stay together because the other person's being defensive. And then when a person becomes contemptuous of that person, it's as if that other person just really, really dislikes you. And oftentimes the reaction to contempt is to protect yourself, is completely to disengage, to turn away, to look away, to close your body off, to not respond back. And when you don't respond back, that oftentimes may lead to an escalation by the other, because that person believes that you're now closed off, and that you can't hear them, you can't hear their complaint. So you can see how important it is early on to listen to the complaint, to take responsibility, so that it doesn't have to be an escalation of this, of a counter argument or a counter criticism, and then the defensiveness, and then the contemptuousness, and then you're going after each other in a real negative way. And once that starts to happen, it's really difficult to repair that. Now, I mentioned, I know that this is not very positive, but what I want to take away from this is if you notice these things in your relationship, you have to back up. You have to really back up and really try to increase the positives in your relationship, because these are predictors of significant relationship problems. I'd like to look at a couple other factors that have significant influence over our relationships, and these are distance and direction. Evan Friedman spoke about these, and I don't have a reference for this, but if you think about distance in a relationship and direction, think about distance first. That distance has to do with how far you are, not just physically, but in an emotional sense. And then in some relationships, the distance can be too close. You can actually be too close to that other person, so close that you can't hear them. It's as if you are thinking and feeling for each other. There's not two distinct selves. You're not differentiated in that relationship. It's like you're like a one big us. You're like a one big fused mess. And so when you're too close, the boundaries are too open. There's too free of an exchange, and that you again begin to feel for each other. So a relationship can be too close, and that there needs to be more differentiation between the two of you. Similarly, a relationship can be too distant. You can be too far apart, so far apart that you really can't hear the other person. And that's just not a physical far apart. It can be an emotional far apart. And you can think about all the things that could get in the way that could create distance in a relationship. It could be that you're too busy, you're too preoccupied, that the other person has hurt you, or something else has come up in the relationship that creates distance. Oftentimes it could be a job, it could be work, it could be preoccupation with something. It could be an interest or an activity, that you could be so interested in sports, you could be so interested in working out, that takes up so much of your time that that creates distance in your relationship. It could be a bad habit. It could be substance use or substance abuse that could put distance in your relationship between someone. What is the optimal? The optimal is something where you're not too close and you're not too far. In fact, there's some balance between those. There's times when you're close and you're well differentiated, that you know who you are and that person knows who they are. And so the relationship can tolerate the closeness without losing the sense of self, and that you can really share things closely. And at the same time, there's the ability to step away for you to be able to engage in those things that are important to you, and for that other person to have interest in activities outside of their relationship with you, so that they can engage in those things. They can have outside interest without you being jealous, or without the other person being jealous of your outside interest. There's trust in the relationship, and so the distance is just right, where there's times of closeness and there's times when you can be separate. The boundaries are not too open. The boundaries are also not too rigid. Direction is also really important. Evan Friedman said, if someone is moving away from you at the speed of light, the speed of sound will never catch up to them. And so if someone is moving away from you, they cannot hear you. If you're pursuing them and they're distancing from you, they're moving away from you in the opposite direction, then it's going to be very difficult for you to have an understanding. What's important is you want to change the direction of the relationship so that that person is moving towards you and you're moving towards that person. What kind of things are going to lead you to move toward each other rather than away from each other? I mean, those are things that you'll have to assess based on that particular relationship. It's going to be those positives. It's going to be things that you share. It's going to be things that you have in common, things that you like about the other person. It's going to be the ways in which you enrich each other's lives. That's going to lead you to move toward each other. Being a whole, complete self is going to make you more interesting to your partner. It's going to lead you to have something about you that is like a resource, that's going to be something that's special, that the other person is going to be interested in, which is going to lead that person to move towards you. So direction is really important. Assess the direction in your relationship. If the other person is scared, rather than you moving towards them, it might be important for you to just be still, to allow that person to come towards you, because they might be frightened. They might be scared of intimacy. You might be scared of intimacy. You may have had some negative experiences in relationships. And so it makes it really difficult to move towards another person. You might need to take a step towards each other at a time. You might need to let that person know that you've been hurt before, so that person can stay more stationary and you can take some steps towards them. Or the opposite, that you stay still. I've done lots of work with young people and adults who've had really lots of hurtful relationships, and I call it sitting with squirrels, that you have to learn how to be still so that person can move towards you, not in a physical sense, but in an emotional sense, so they can not have to be paying attention to whether you're getting too close, because that then becomes really scary for them. But you allow them to work their way closer and closer towards you, and that requires you being able to sit really still, like sitting with squirrels. So let's move now towards active listening. And in this section, we're going to talk about several different factors. We're going to talk about the reasons for listening, levels of listening, and then what is active listening, which moves right into some of the key elements of active listening. Listening isn't just being able to pick up on what the other person says. It's intentional and it's active. It's listening for that deeper level of meaning. So let's look at first, what are some of the reasons for listening? What do you think some of the reasons for listening are? I'm going to guess that you can probably come up with most of these on your own. I'm giving you a chance to shout those out, write those down. How about to obtain information? That a reason for listening is that there's information that we need. There's something that we don't know, something that we need to know about, something we need to find out. This can happen on a job. This can happen in many different kinds of situations that we don't know everything. So oftentimes there's a need for us to obtain information. We also listen in order to understand, to connect with someone. And so we listen more deeply in order to try to understand what it is that person's trying to communicate to us. We also listen to learn. Like again, there's information that we don't know. There's things that we need to learn. We spend a good part of our lives in a learning mode, a good part of our time in school of some sort, taking classes, reading books, learning more. You're going to be in a period where that curve towards learning is going to be really steep. You have a lot of things that you're going to be learning, a lot of new things that you're going to be trying. And so we listen in order to obtain information, to understand, and also to learn. Why else do we listen? We also listen simply for enjoyment. Remember, we're a storied people. We love stories. We love to hear stories. We love to tell stories. Stories are common in our culture, and so just being able to listen has a factor of enjoyment in it. What are the 5 levels of listening? Let's go through those. The first level I would describe as total ignorance. Doesn't mean that you're ignorant. That's when you're just not paying attention at all. Maybe a person is trying to talk to you and you're not really interested. You don't really need to hear what they have to say. That information is not important to you. And so you may be just looking up in the air or looking right by them. And so it's obvious probably to that other person that you're facing them, that you're in their space, you're in their proximity, but you're really not listening. What is that like when someone is speaking to you and you're not listening? What is it like for you when you're speaking to someone? You have something really important to say, or at least it feels important to you, and that person's not listening at all. I believe everybody who's watching this video has had plenty of incidents where there was something important that you needed to say and the other person wasn't listening at all. They may have stood there in that closed posture with their arms crossed. How about those times when it's not so obvious that you're not listening, but you're pretending to listen? This kind of speaks for itself. Is that, after a little while, the other person, the speaker, begins to understand that, is this person really listening? Because the way you respond, the way you reflect back, the kind of questions you might ask, the look on your face, is going to let them know that you're really not listening. It probably would be better to tell the person that you can't listen right now, that you don't have the time, or that you don't have the interest right now, and let them know when you'll be ready to listen rather than to pretend to listen. What has it been like for you when you've spoken to someone and you thought initially that they were listening, but it really quickly became pretty clear that they really weren't paying attention to you, that they were just pretending that they were listening? Usually one of the first or second responses out of their mouth would let you know about that. How about selfish listening? Selfish listening is when you're listening to that other person, and while you're listening to that other person, you're really only picking out the things that they're saying that are interesting to you, that are important to you, that matter to you. What is that like to the other person who's speaking, to have someone that's only listening to the part that's has to do with them? What has it been like for you when you've been in a position where someone was listening selfishly to what you were saying? They oftentimes respond back how when you say something? They'll respond back with what it is that interests them, what it is that caught their attention, and they don't really hear necessarily what it is that's important to you. It oftentimes leads to the next, which is premature responding. That when you're selfish listening, you're already starting to formulate ideas in your head as the person's speaking. And so rather than listening until they finish, you are ready with your response before they even finish. And so oftentimes you'll cut them off. And so you'll respond prematurely. What does that feel like to the other person? To have something they want to tell you and they're partway through it. Maybe they haven't even gotten to the point. Sometimes people like to tell stories. I mean, I'm guilty of that. Is that oftentimes I'll preface and set the story up. And if someone prematurely responds, they may not hear the point at all. What's that like if you're trying to set up what it is that you're telling them by giving them the background, and they hear a little piece of that, and they already have an idea, and they respond back prematurely to that? You really feel discounted. You feel like you're not very important. What you had to say wasn't very important. And how does that reflect on your relationship? How does that define your relationship with that other person? And then, of course, there's active listening. And we're going to talk about active listening a little bit more. So there's 5 levels of listening. There's total ignorance, where you're not listening at all. There can be times when you're pretending to listen, times when you're listening only for the part that concerns you or is of interest to you, which then may lead you to prematurely respond with your very first thought, which may cut the other person off rather than actively listen to what it is that's meaningful to the other person. So what is active listening? Active listening involves a number of components. It's attending to the speaker fully. It's giving them your undivided attention. It's being ready to hear them all the way out. It's the ability to paraphrase and reflect back the content. Can you repeat back what it is that they're sharing, what it is that they're saying to you, what it is that's the message part of what they're sharing, what they're speaking? It's also being able to pick up that underlying feeling tone, being able to reflect back the feeling connected with it along with the content, and also being able to read between the lines, to be able to hear some of the deeper meaning, to be able to share some of that. What is it like when you're able to pick up on what this means to the other person? You're able to reflect back not just the words that they said and the content of it, but the feeling tone of it, as well as what it means to them. That's when you really go from listening to really understanding, and the other person feels that you have understood them. They feel more affirmed and validated. So what are some of the key elements? Let's take a little bit of time, and we've already touched on some of these already, but the key elements of active listening are 1, paying attention. So it's being attentive, giving them your undivided attention. It's demonstrating and showing that you're listening. It's being able to provide feedback. It's that content piece. It's deferring judgment and not prematurely responding. And then responding appropriately with that feeling piece and that meaning piece. So let's look at each one of these. So again, paying attention. That's being able to look at the speaker directly. It's giving them your undivided attention. It's avoiding distractions, putting yourself in a place where you're not distracted, to show that you're listening. So that involves nodding. When you're listening to someone, it's you almost feel like a bobblehead. That if you're following, you're kind of like, yes, 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 I'm following you, mm-hmm. And so you're giving these minimal encouragers. You have a facial expression of interest and focus. Your eyes aren't shifting around. You're not burning a hole in them, but you're paying attention. You're watching their face. You're listening to them. You're nodding. You're letting them know that you're following. You have more of an open posture as opposed to a closed posture, which communicates that you're open to what they're sharing with you. So you're showing that you're listening. You also want to begin to provide feedback. You want to pause your own personal filters. So you want to not selfishly listen. You want to be able to paraphrase and reflect the content. You want to be able to reflect back, it sounds like you're saying, and to be able to complete that sentence. And at first it may seem a little awkward, but you may sound like you're parroting back. Over time though, if you parrot back the significant part of what they say, what they share, you'll be able to then start to put it in your own words and to be able to do that much more instinctively and intuitively. And so you want to let them know, first off, that you're following and that you're hearing, and you can reflect the content, that you're following them each step of the way. You can also let them know that you're listening and providing them feedback by asking open questions, asking them good questions that invite them to expand on, to clarify, to elaborate and explore what it is that they're sharing. I mean, when someone has asked you good questions, it's obvious to you that you know that they're listening and they're paying attention, that they're interested in what you're sharing. And it's not so much about what they're interested in as much as them wanting to better understand what you're sharing, but also wanting to understand you. And you want to try to summarize the points periodically. So if you're getting a whole lot of content, you want to be able to summarize what they're saying. So not just paraphrase and reflect, but be able to summarize those points periodically. Again, you want to defer judgment. You want to listen carefully. You want to avoid interrupting and not prematurely respond. You want to allow them to finish and to make their point. Oftentimes you'll find that there'll be a little pause when they finish. You'll notice when they're finished saying what they're saying. So be respectful of each other and allow them to make their point. And then before you respond back with what you want to say, let them know that you heard what they said first. Let them know that you were following them. Then you can add to it, and that starts to lead us towards dialogue. So then you want to respond appropriately. You want to reflect the content. You want to reflect the feeling, the emotional tone that went along with what they were sharing. Were they anxious? Were they excited? Were they upset? Were they concerned? This may be a place where you have to expand on your feeling and emotional words. I feel like I was raised in a way, and a lot of men are raised this way, where it was like the 8 crayon box of crayons. I had 8 colors in mine. That I didn't have a whole lot of feeling words, and so I've had to really work on expanding my feeling vocabulary to be able to accurately reflect back the emotional tone. And then listen for the deeper meaning. Listen between the lines on what it is that seems to really matter to the speaker. Oftentimes they don't share that. They don't share that directly. But when you're able to pick up on that, and you're able to reflect that back, it lets them know that you're understanding them at a much deeper level, that you see them, and that what does it feel like for the other person to be seen. It's really validating. It affirms and validates the existence of that other person. You can also pair an open question with your reflection. So you can reflect back the content, the feeling, the deeper meaning, your understanding. And see, I believe you don't have to be a psychologist, you don't have to be a counselor to be able to do this. It really comes from caring about somebody and really listening closely, really listening for what it is that matters. I mean, listen to yourself sometimes as you talk. And what is it that you're sharing? What is it that you want the other person to understand about you that may be a little risky? What does it feel like when someone really picks up on that and shares that back with you? I think it creates greater intimacy in the relationship. That person naturally feels closer to you when you're able to do that. You naturally feel closer to that other person when they're able to pick up on that deeper meaning. And the other person, the speaker, is also interested in you understanding. So if you don't have it exactly right, oftentimes they will then say something back to you that helps you get on track. If you're slightly off track, they will help you get on track because they have an interest in you understanding. If you really are intentional about that, they will pick up on your sincerity and pick up on your intentionality, and they will also work really hard to help you understand if you're trying to understand. And so if you can reflect back that understanding and then ask a question, an open-ended question that invites them to then share with you, not necessarily specific information like what time did that happen, but an open question is, what was that like for you? What happened next? Then what happened? How did you deal with that? When you think about that, what is that like for you now? So those are open questions that invite the person to share more and communicate that you're interested in them. And then you want to listen for the speaker's response, because it'll confirm your accuracy. And I look for what's called a yes. If the speaker is nodding, then they're letting you know that you're on track. And oftentimes when you're able to reflect back really accurately what that person is sharing, you'll get what I call the big yes. You'll oftentimes get like a sigh, like yes. Now why do you get like the sigh and the breathy yes? It's because it really feels good to be understood. For any of you out there listening to this, when someone really understands you and gets it, it feels good to be understood. It feels good for someone to be on the same page with you. So it matters in a relationship for you to be on the same page with that person. If you want to create greater closeness and intimacy, listen. Listen carefully, active listen with that person. Interestingly, I found this as I was looking for information on this. This is the Chinese symbol for listen. There's a number of different characters. I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 different characters in this. And interestingly, the Chinese symbol for listen has on the left there the ear. So you listen with your ear. There's a you there listening. You listen with your eyes, and you give them your undivided attention. But look down below on the right. You're also listening with your heart. You're listening for the feeling and the meaning and the understanding. So look at all those different pieces that go into listening. That you hear, that you see the other person, that there is a you there listening, that they have your undivided attention, and you're listening with your heart. It's really interesting. I was in a workshop not too long ago with Linda Lantieri, and she introduced us to a phrase. It's called the sawubona. Sawubona is a South African phrase that means I see you. And so she invited us that as we went around and introduced ourselves to each other, that we introduce ourselves and the other person respond with I see you. And then you would say back, I am here, I see you, and that person would say, I am here. So can you see how this all starts to fit together? That it's important to not only hear the other person, but to say, I see you with my eyes, and not just you, the physical body standing in front of me, but I see the you inside that body that's communicating to me, and you have my undivided attention, and you have my heart. So let's now, we're starting to come down the home stretch. I'd like to look at some of the work by Gary Chapman, and this is some popular psych stuff. He wrote a book called The 5 Love Languages, The Secret to Love That Lasts. Now, you know, in my field, in the counseling field, we don't really use this literature. But you know, if you're really paying attention to the other person and you understand the language that's meaningful to them, and you communicate to them in that language, that it really connects you with that person, and that person really feels understood. So I like to share some of these ideas from Gary Chapman with you. That he's identified, and there's probably more than this, but he's identified 5 love languages. The love language of gifts, touch, acts of service, words of affirmation, and quality time. Let's look at these one at a time. Receiving gifts. This isn't about materialism. It's not about stuff. What's behind a gift? I mean, when you've received a really good gift, what does it communicate to you? It communicates that that person really understands you, because in order to give you that gift, they know what would be really important to you, what really matters to you. I remember my older brother, the one that I had the bicycle accident with, around Christmas time when we exchanged gifts. He took some of the mystery out, but he would let me know what kind of things would be really helpful, would be things that he would really like, would be things that really mattered to him. And so he didn't make it like a love test, like if you really love me, you'll be able to guess. He would let me know. And if I gave him something off that list, he really, really appreciated it. I'll tell you a little secret that with my wife and my two daughters, I would use them kind of like spies, that at Christmas time, like when they were younger, after they had gone out shopping with my wife, I would go with them out shopping. We'd go to some of the same stores, and they would let me know what my wife touched, what she looked at, what she picked up off the hanger or off the line. And they would pay attention to that. And so I would oftentimes buy lots of those things, and I would be on track. Now, I'm not saying that you need to have a spy in order to give a good gift, but the point I'm making is that if you pay really attention to the other person, you'll begin to notice what it is that they care about, what it is that they prize, what it is that matters to them. And if you can give them a gift that somehow captures that, somehow responds to that, somehow lets them know that I know that this matters to you and that you really treasures this, it communicates to them that you know me and that you were thinking about me. And it's that you know me, not just me of the superficial me, but the me in terms of, again, listening with the heart. Now, this isn't necessarily everybody's love language. And so you have to do some assessment here. Is your partner, is this person someone where one of their love languages gifts? I'm going to ask you at the end of this, what are your love languages? What are two of yours that really matter to you? How about the love language of touch? That, and I'm not talking about a sexual touch. I'm talking about just the touch of security and belongingness, that you're there. It could be a hug or just a pat on the back. I remember some years ago, I struggled with some lower back problems, and I was in a whole lot of pain. I was really out of alignment, and the muscles down here were really hurting, and so I was all balled up. And if you've ever had any lower back pain or back pain, it's like you can't find a comfortable position. You can lay down, you can sit down, you can't find a comfortable position. And so I was in a whole lot of pain, and I needed to go back to my doctor, and I ended up going to see a chiropractor who helped me. But I remember when I was in the most pain that my wife came up. She sat on the side of the bed, and she just reached over and she put her hand on me and touched me. And she didn't say a word. She didn't say anything. She just touched me. That made all the difference in the world. There was nothing that she could say that would take away the pain, but just that touch made a difference. It let me know that she understood and that she was with me. I remember going to a meeting where Elie Wiesel spoke, and Elie Wiesel, if you know him, was a German concentration camp survivor. He was talking to a group of counselors, and he said, it's one thing to suffer. It's far worse to suffer alone. And he looked out at the counselors. He said, if you do nothing else, you really help people not be alone when they're suffering. And so that act, that my wife, that touch when I was in pain, let me know that I wasn't alone, that it was a love language. It demonstrated her care and concern for me. Sometimes just being in the proximity, it doesn't have to actually be a physical touch. You can just be present, accessible. You can just be there for that person. That's touch. It's not necessarily being touchy-feely. And so that person feels that when you touch me, or when I'm touched, that I feel connected. I feel connected to you. I feel that you care about me and that you understand. How about acts of service? Acts of service is knowing what's important to that other person, knowing what matters for them. It's a different kind of gift. It's let me do that for you. Let me unburden you. Let me unburden you from some of the weight that you have, some of the responsibility that you have. It's not just doing something in order to get something back. It's freely giving an act of service. It's an act of kindness. It's a way to serve, and in doing that, it speaks volumes to that person. It's that Nike commercial, just do it. It's getting the job done, doing it without necessarily being asked, without complaining, without saying anything about it. It's just taking care of it. That acts of service is a love language. When someone does something for you that was unexpected, I mean, just think how you really appreciate that and how that affects your relationship with that person. It's not because you're expecting anything back. It's just that you freely gave that because you care about that person. And so when you do that, that person says, I feel loved when you take care of things that are important to me. One, you understand what's important to me. So you see me, but you also take care of those things which unburden me. And then words of affirmation. That, actions don't always speak louder than words. That sometimes we need to hear it. We need to hear kind, encouraging, and positive words. We need to hear a compliment that's unsolicited. Letting someone know that you appreciate them, that you care about them, that you love them. And you don't necessarily have to give reasons why. But you're able to give reasons why. That if you say I love you and they say why, you're able to let them know why you love them. What it is about them that matters. What it is about them that you care about. Again, it's about seeing them. It's about valuing who they are and being able to express that caring and that enjoyment. So I'm nourished when you care and believe in me. Affirmation and validation are so important because it lets that person know that they exist, that they matter. It is a love language. And then quality time. Quality time is noticing and showing interest. It caps on the act of listening, giving someone your full and undivided attention. It's not just sort of doing it because it's a responsibility. It's doing it because you have an interest in that other person. There's times that you may not particularly like it yourself. And rather than groaning and grumbling about it, to go ahead and dive into it and be fully involved and give the undivided attention and spend that time with them because you know it matters to them. It's sharing activities and conversations that the other person may enjoy. It's watching a TV show that they like, that you may not particularly like. It's giving up the ball game and watching something that maybe your partner really is interested in. And then you'll see when you do that they'll reciprocate. And you're not doing it to get the reciprocation, but you're doing it because you care about each other. So it's more of a willing participation. And it's being interested in what interests the other person. And so I feel close when you're interested in me. When you're interested in me, it's like a magnet. It draws you closer to that person. I mean, if you just do an experiment over the next day or the next week, and you think about these different love languages, and you pick somebody, and you can't be afraid to be close to someone. It's not a sexualized thing. It's about letting someone know that you care about them. It's being able to love somebody unashamedly. And so pick somebody that you care about. Listen closely to what love language they use. And go ahead and respond back with something from that love language. And see what happens in your relationship. They will feel closer to you. Now, you're not doing this as a way to manipulate them and to get them closer to you. You do this because, again, listening, there's the heart piece. It comes from your heart. And so, which of these love languages speaks to you? Which of these communicates to you? What matters the most? Pick two. Is it gifts? Is it the language of touch? Acts of service? Affirming and validating words? Quality time. What seems to really communicate to you? What do you value the most? What would happen if you let a person that cares about you know? Don't put them through the love test so that they have to guess, but I believe they could probably guess. But to let them know what matters to you, and if you matter to them, they'll more likely respond back in that language. It's not about, well, I'll do this because I'll give them what they need or what they ask for. It's not feeling like you have to do it or you're compelled to do it. It's doing it again because you care about that other person. So let's kind of summarize and let's finish this up. So I'm going to talk about dialogue just for a little bit. So active listening involves really listening. And if you've heard a theme through a lot of the relationship part, it's about being able to really understand the other person. And it's about building relationship. You build relationship through dialogue. A person speaks, you listen attentively. So you're able to hear, but you go beyond just hearing the content. You're able to understand because you're able to pick up on the feeling, you're able to pick up on the meaning, you're able to reflect that back, and you're able, in reflecting that back, to let them know that you respect and care about them. And then you're interested in them sharing more. And so relationship is built on dialogue, and dialogue is building a conversation. It's you being able to let that person speak and share with you what it is that's on their mind, to be able to not interrupt, to be able to listen carefully, to be able to not respond prematurely, to hear them out and to be able to reflect back what you're caring about, what you're hearing from them, letting them know that you care about them. Because again, it's your ears, it's your eyes, it's your undivided attention, it's your heart. That all those come into play. So it builds a conversation, and in doing that, it affirms and validates the other as being important to you. And then when you do that, it's natural for them to reciprocate back, for them to then listen to you with that same kind of caring, that same kind of attention, and then to reflect back understanding of that, and to be able to invite you to share more, for you to be able to invite them to share more, and then you can have a real conversation with them and a real understanding of what is meaningful to them. And again, dialogue, I shared the South African Zulu culture, the Sawubona, and I don't think I mentioned Ngihona. But again, to summarize a lot of what we've gone over today, I know it's been a lot, that in order to manage relationship, you need to first start with I, not in a selfish sense, but you need to understand yourself. You need to understand what it is that you believe, what it is that that you value, what your beliefs are, what the chapters are in your story, because you filter what the other person says through your own experience, that I see you through me, in a sense. And so you have to start with yourself, and you have to differentiate in order to be clear about where you begin and end, and where the other person begins. And then you can step into that relationship. And when you step into that relationship, you want to understand that there's going to be a ratio of positives to negatives. And if you're struggling in that relationship, you want to increase the number of positives. And we've talked about how you can increase those positives by emphasizing the love language of that other person, by active listening and really understanding. And you want to, on the back of your mind, to be on the lookout for those four horsemen. You want to listen if things move from complaining to criticism, to defensiveness, to contempt, and to stonewalling. when you hear those, you need to back up and you need to really pay closer attention to the love language, to being able to let that person know that you care, to be able to see them differently and help them be able to see you differently, and to be able to active listen more. And I think that will help you not only in your relationships with work, but also with your personal relationships in terms of friends, but also with intimate others that you desire a closer relationship with. So we'll stop there, and I appreciate the time that you've devoted to this, and I hope that it's helpful to you.